Shabbat Shalom. About a week, I'd say like a week ago, I was guest teaching in the 3rd grade class. And we were going through the Jewish family tree that starts in Genesis. I start off by telling them, there's Abraham, he's the first Jewish man, his wife Sarah, first Jewish woman, mother and father of us all, yada, yada, great. I tell them their son is Isaac, and he marries Rebecca, and they have 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. And then I have to describe Jacob's family situation, which went a little like this. I said, well, Jacob was married to Rachel and Leah. He was married to 2 women? Well, they weren't 2 random women. They were sisters. He was married to 2 sisters? Well, they weren't like just any sisters, like they were his mother, Rebecca. She had a brother, Laban. They were his daughter, so really they were his cousins. Ew! He married his cousins? This is going so well. I was like, it's not the point. That part isn't the point, guys. It's not the point. They had 13 children. They had 13 children? Well, not just from those 2 women. There was also, how do you describe concubines to 3rd graders? I was like, well, also there were the sisters and their maids. This one kid looked at me very like this, and he said, so Jacob was cheating with 4 women? I'm like, no, he wasn't cheating. No, he wasn't. It was different back then. It was different. I think some families had some very interesting conversations around the dinner table that night after Hebrew school. For the record, we had no complaints, so we're good. Unsurprisingly, of all the patriarchs, Jacob was the favorite of this particular 3rd grade class. Not just for his unique family dynamics, though that was obviously a big part, but also the whole name change thing. That's what happens also in this week's Parsha. They were very curious about the whole experience. Jacob, sends ahead all these gifts for Esau. He's concerned maybe Esau is still mad about the whole theft thing. And he sends, his huge family ahead, and then he just takes some time by himself. He's alone. And that night, when he's by himself, he wrestles with what we usually call an angel. He wins the wrestling match. He asks for a blessing. He gets a name, Israel. The kids were really stuck on this whole thing. The angel part gave them a lot of questions. Who was this angel? Why would an angel try to hurt Jacob? Are there angels real? Are there other angels in the Torah? Great questions for the 3rd grade religious school. I was extremely impressed. But I told them, and I'm telling you, I don't think that the angel part is really the big deal here. I think we're losing focus on what I think is the most important spiritual aspect of this whole interlude. Because Jacob sends his big family on, right? He had a big day that day. He just set up the delivery of hundreds of animals that was probably noisy and smelly, and there's so much going on. Gifts, to appease his possibly very vengeful brother. And then he had to go home to a household full of people. His 13 children, the wives and the other women, and so much noise. I'm sure we can all commiserate with a big, noisy household, having just had Thanksgiving. Sometimes you just want some peace and quiet. And the Torah tells us that before this big wrestling match, Jacob got it. V'yitzir Yaakov levado. Jacob was left alone. And it's only then that he has this intensely spiritual experience. He wrestles this divine spiritual figure who won't tell him its name, but instead gives him a name, to be a blessing, Yisrael. Ki sariti im Elohim ve'im anashim v'tuchal, meaning, for you have striven with beings divine and human, and you have prevailed. And he doesn't have this big spiritual awakening while he's taking care of business, or even while he's surrounded by all the people he loves and cares for. He has it when he takes the time to be alone. It's only then that there is silence and space enough for this spiritual wrestling, for the clarity that it gives him. He's dealt with so many difficult things in those intermediate years between being a crafty kid who bilked his brother out of a blessing and a birthright, and the mature man that he has now become. I think he needed to reckon with that. Maybe he needed a little reminder that he is not the kid that he was, who did those things to his brother so long ago. I think he needed maybe a little chizik, a little encouragement for the difficult task of doing tshuva with his brother. And he had the mental space to have that clarity because he took the time very purposefully to be alone, by himself. Or as a teacher of mine put it, not by himself, but with himself. And that is a fundamental difference. Many religions place a very high spiritual value on solitude. Think of a Buddhist or Catholic monks and nuns who live very cloistered experiences, very cloistered existences, dedicating their time to prayer and religious contemplation. Many monasteries, Buddhist and Catholic both, in fact, have dedicated times for monastic silence. That is, that the people who live there spend hours a day not talking, hours every day. Mahatma Gandhi is a Hindu. He kept one whole day of silence every week. Now, Islam and Judaism don't really practice these kinds of silence. Have you met us? Or these extreme kinds of solitude. But we do value it in moderation. Islam, they have a practice called khalwa, which literally means solitude. It's where you withdraw for just a little bit from the outside world to spend time with yourself, contemplate spiritual matters, and in doing so, they believe you grow closer to God. Judaism, unsurprisingly, has a similar practice. The more mystical types call it hitbodedut, meaning, you guessed it, solitude. It was popularized by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov 200 years ago, 250. But it had been practiced long before him. It's the act of secluding oneself for a short time, usually in nature, but you can do it indoors if you got it. And you just speak in your mother tongue, whatever language is comfortable for you. You talk to God, to the divine, to the universe, whatever you want to call it. I think it's all the same. Rabbi Nachman called this shouting in the still, small voice, referencing the kol demama daka that Elijah the prophet hears. In the book of Kings, there's this huge ruckus. There's an earthquake and a fire and the crash and the bang, and wow, it's crazy. And the text makes sure to tell us that God is not in all that big, wondrous, wow. It's after all that the kol demama daka, the still, small voice, is heard. Is it God? Is it Elijah's conscience? The text doesn't tell us. But it asks him, why are you here, Elijah? Malacha po Eliyahu. Meaning, what are you searching for? What are you seeking? What is your purpose? That's the kind of spiritual clarity that Rabbi Nachman felt you could achieve with just a little bit of solitude, a little bit of quiet. It's only by quieting the clash and the crash of our outside world, all that sound and fury, that we are able to focus on what really matters. That we're able to give ourselves the space to concentrate on ourselves, and in doing so, on matters greater than ourselves. I think a lot of us are, if not afraid, deeply uncomfortable with solitude, being by ourselves, being alone, because we are social creatures, us human beings. We hate feeling lonely. And in fairness, I don't think Judaism or any other religion is a proponent of loneliness. Quite the opposite. It's kind of ironic. I literally stood here and I gave a devar last week that was the opposite of this, that we are spiritually specifically charged with seeking other people out. It's a religious imperative. We need to be with other people. And I do think that's true. And the pandemic has drawn a very sharp line under the epidemic of loneliness that existed but is perhaps amplified these past few years. Loneliness is literally killing us. It affects our mental and physical health. I'm not advocating that. There is a difference between being lonely and being alone. Like there's a difference between being by yourself and with yourself. At the end of the day, the longest relationship you will ever have, and thus the most important, is the one you have with yourself. And if you can't spend even an hour alone with that guy, life is going to be pretty tough. I mean, it's already pretty tough. Which is another reason we need to be comfortable being with ourselves. For the spiritual and mental calmness and clarity provides, yes, like a clean workbench or kitchen is the easiest to work in, but also for the opportunity to check in with ourselves. Like how only after the din could Elijah hear the kol demama daka, the still small voice, and reckon with his own spiritual wrestling. Or how Jacob wrestled with his own demons, or was it an angel, reconciling the person he was with the person he was becoming. And again, we're Jews, so I don't think we can take vows of silence. Like physically, I don't think we're capable of it. Nor do we advocate extremes like that, but neither do we advocate extremes in the opposite direction, continually distracting ourselves with outside noise, all that crash and the clash and the din and all that stuff, to the exclusion of alone time. So if you don't already, if it's not in your nature, I do urge you to take even just a little bit of time in your day, in your week, to spend some time with yourself. Do a little self-check-in. How are you feeling? What are you needing? Who are you, and who do you need to be? And then listen. Listen to your kol damama daka, your still, small voice. What is it telling you? What do you need to hear? Shabbat shalom.